Fireside Tales. Hello, I'm Merlin, Mililli. Welcome to my fireside, where I tell weird tales within tales. And I drink coffee. I drink coffee from my skull mug because I'm a deadhead. Hot. A deadhead is someone who really likes the Grateful Dead. And the Grateful Dead is a band, a 60s psychedelic rock band. Excuse me. I really like them. They got their name from, a Funk and Wagnall's dictionary, which discussed a story from the Tibetan Book of the Dead called The Story of the Grateful Dead. And so every week I tell you the story of the Grateful Dead as I heard it from a deadhead by a fire, as it should be told. I also talk about the Akashic Records. The Akashic Records are, it's an ancient metaphysical library. Where every soul has a book. You can only reach the library through meditation. So I say metaphysical. It's not, there are metaphysical libraries in our plane, not to be confused with those. It's not an actual building or a library you can walk into or contact on the internet. It's metaphysical. It's not on this plane. I can only get there through meditation. And I only visit my book. So I only look in my book. And every week I've been telling you what's in my book. And I started with my very last life before this one on our first episode. And then we went all the way back to the beginning of my book in our second episode. And I've been working our way forward to present day. And I discuss every week threads that I have from one life to another. And one of my threads is that I seem to have been a psychic medium for multiple lives. And I'm a psychic medium in this life. And I've been able to communicate with the spirit realm since I was a small child. And the spirits have a theory on reincarnation. And this is a show about reincarnation. The Grateful Dead story is a story about reincarnation. So every week I discuss reincarnation, and I'm trying to enlighten humanity as to exactly what reincarnation is. So nonetheless, the spirits have a theory on reincarnation from the spirit realm where they think, or some of them surmise, that people who've reincarnated have also been murdered. That is to say, if you've been murdered, you will reincarnate. Sort of like a parting gift. Nonetheless, it seems if this is true, if the theory is true, that everybody who has reincarnated has also been murdered. I've been murdered a lot. I have a really big, old, dusty book full of many lives. The one today that I'm going to discuss is definitely the most colorful and the most vibrant within the book. So that's kind of cool. Every week I also tell the story of the Grateful Dead, like I said, as I heard it from a deadhead by a fire. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Once there was a traveler. It was so long ago that she traveled by foot. She happened upon a town where there was a crowd. She got closer and found that the crowd was squabbling. She got closer still and found that the crowd was squabbling over a dead body. Not just over his debts, which they were, not just over who was going to bury him, which they were, but literally over the dead body. He was laying right there. Traveler was stunned by this atrocious scene. And so the traveler paid the dead man's debts and paid for a proper burial and prayed over his grave. And then she traveled on. And many decades later, the traveler, from the beginning of the story, happened upon a life or death situation in which, from out of nowhere, a total stranger scoops her up and saves her life. She's stunned. She can't believe it. Oh my God, thank you. Who are you? Where did you come from? Why did you save my life? And the stranger responds simply by saying, I am the Grateful Dead. It's a story about reincarnation. The Grateful Dead is now living and still grateful that the traveler saved his death, essentially. So he swooped in to save her life. Some people think it's a corpse at the end that saves her life, but corpses don't save lives. Zombies don't save lives. It's kind of silly. Oh, nonetheless, I've been discussing every week my book, like I said. And we started with my very last life right before this one. And then we went back to my very first life in my book, which was in ancient Peru. We discussed interdimensional travel and how I was a cloud bird for a little while in a place called High Earth. Then we discussed ancient Tibet and ancient Egypt and ancient Sumeria. Twice I was in ancient Sumeria. Then I ended up in ancient Greece. Then in my book I have a watermark, which is kind of weird. It seems to mark where time changed from BC to AD, which is kind of strange. I think it marks the Great Flood. It's just my opinion. Everything before the mark is light and dry and sandy. Everything after the watermark is wet and dark and muddy. Nonetheless, I end up in ancient Scotland. Then I do some interdimensional travel. And I end up in Old England, Ireland, and Scotland. Then I end up in Byzantium and Constantinople, which are both modern-day Turkey. Different time periods of Turkey. Then I was in France twice, and twice I was burnt at the stake. Then I was in Italy twice. Then I was in England. Then I was born in France, but I ended up in America, in Massachusetts and California. And then I was in Austria. Then I was in Boston. Then I was born in Boston, ended up in England, Virginia, and Maryland. And then the last life I discussed with you guys was a life in which I was born in Scotland and I died in Boston in 1853. So I have these threads. The psychic medium thing is a thread I carry from one life to the next. My other threads are art, music, stars, stargazing, dogs, nights with a K, nature, mountains, math, writing, reading, push against the church. They burnt me at the stake. I have this thing with them. Birds, angels, travel, Native Americans, horses, the ocean, epilepsy. Boston has now become a thread. From here on in, it kind of stays with me. It's still my favorite city. And respect for the poor seems to be a thread. So I last left you in Boston in 1853, and now I picked back up today, not in Boston. I went far away from Boston, probably as far as I could get away from Boston. I picked back up today in 1853 in Zundert, Netherlands, which is not that far from Austria, which I lived a life where I was born in Austria and talked to you about it before. So, and that's the closest life to the Netherlands that I've lived so far here. And I kept the art thread, and despite my push against the church, I tried to be a minister like my father in this life. I was born a boy to a minister and his wife. I was the oldest living child, but there was another child born before me. They had my same name. I ended up making the name famous, but my mother always treated me weird because of that. I could never live up to the child that died. I could never be as great as that child in her eyes. They gave me his name, which is weird for everyone. So I made the name famous, or, well, my past life, who I was in my past life made the name famous. And I was Vincent van Gogh in this life. And it's really cool in my book. This is like at the center. And my book has every one of his paintings in it. All of his drawings. I could go through and just study Vincent from my own book. I didn't realize until recently that all that was even there. When I did the research for my next life, I decided to go just peek at some things, and I wanted to straighten out some things and get some answers to some questions I wasn't sure of. So I went back and looked, and it's just, they seem wet still. Like it's just amazing. And if I ever need a pick-me-up, boy, now I know where to go. But in my book, it was funny, my next life is sort of miserable, so it didn't want to show me that life. And it was like, but look, there's sunflowers. And it kept showing me sunflowers instead of going to the next life, because it's the one after this is pretty miserable. If you think Vincent had a miserable life, there's nothing on some of the other lives I've had. So, Vincent was extremely misunderstood. And like I said, epilepsy is a thread, and Vincent was not an exception to that. Epilepsy is hard to figure out. It's hard to figure out when you're the epileptic, because you have no idea what's going on. And, my seizures started in this life when I was a child, so I had no idea what that was. I didn't know how to describe it to a doctor, or even that I should. Nonetheless, it seemed to take Vincent a a while to figure out that he was epileptic, and he was treated for epilepsy, but in an insane asylum, which is what they did with epileptics until recently. My great grandfather was in this life. My great grandfather was in insane asylum because he was epileptic. It's hereditary, and apparently carries on from one life to another. Excuse me. So he did not drink turpentine or eat paint. I want to straighten that out. But he did lick his brushes to a point from time to time. But he was epileptic. I don't think it was, I was told in art school, cadmium in the paint made him crazy because he licked his brushes to a point. But he didn't swallow that. He spit that out. And I think he was epileptic. I don't think he was mad at all, actually. But like I said, he wanted to be a minister, so they sent him off to mining country to be a minister, and he was a great minister, but he gave away all of his belongings to people who really seemed to need them more than him. And when the church found that he had been living in squalor, they didn't like that, and he was basically fired from a volunteer position. So he taught for a little while. He had a woman break his heart. Eugenia broke his heart. He had a ring for her. He was going to propose, and he did propose, and she turned him down. And so he threw himself into theology, and he taught at a boys' school. I taught in other lives as well, so that makes sense. But his cousin misunderstood a lot. He never intended to propose to his cousin. He had the ring from Eugenia, and his cousin thought for some reason it was for her and decided to make a big deal about it and make the whole family against him, and no one would listen to him. He was never allowed to tell his side of the story, but the ring was not for his cousin. It was for Eugenia, his landlady's daughter, and it wasn't for her. It never was for her. He never had any intentions of asking his cousin to marry him. Didn't have any. That wasn't even a thought in his head. He never made any advances. Anyway, so Vincent never beat himself either. That was something one of the documentaries said. But he did have a habit of covering up for those who did beat him up. He did it kind of regularly, probably to avoid future beatings. It's probably something he developed early in life from, childhood bullies. If you cover for the bully might not beat you up the next day. So, by living, though, in the coal mines with the poor people, he really proved his respect for the poor. And never varied. I still have a great respect for the poor. I've run free kitchens, or I used to run free kitchens, and I've fed millions of people in this life for free. So I still have this thing for the poor. It carries on, and it's been there for many lifetimes, even before Vincent. Like I said, Galileo had it. Didn't understand that the Pope wouldn't have that same respect for the poor. So Paul Gauguin. He was a piece of work himself, just all by himself. And Vincent never had syphilis. Theo never had syphilis. Paul Gauguin had syphilis. Raging syphilis. So, I don't know. I imagine Paul made up the rumors that everybody else had syphilis except him. But he was the one with the syphilis. So, leave Vincent out of that business. And like I said, he was treated in Saint Remy for epilepsy, and he did pretty well once they figured out that he was epileptic. But prior to that was his fight with Paul Gauguin. And I think what happened was they had a fight. Now, say what you want. Vincent used to pay prostitutes to model, and he would let them keep their clothes on for modeling, and he talked to them and respected them and treated them like human beings, and so they would give him freebies on occasion. And Paul noticed this, and Paul wasn't paying them to stay clothed and model. He was paying them for sex, and he got into an argument with Vincent because Vincent wasn't paying for sex and Paul had to. So, Vincent was shaving while they were having this argument, and at the time did not know he was epileptic. And stress and alcohol, they were drinking a lot, absinthe in particular, both can cause seizures, though. Stress and alcohol seems like a vital combination. Vincent was shaving with a straight blade because this was 18 something. So he's shaving, they're arguing, and I think what happened is he had a seizure. And he cut his ear off. And in the midst of the seizure and the ear cutting off, what he understood was that Paul was mad that he wasn't paying for sex. And then he didn't pay the last woman. And Paul knew it. So that's why, as soon as he came to or whatever and realized he had chopped off his ear, I think he thought it was Paul because he didn't understand that he'd had a seizure. I thought it was Paul until I just went and looked to double check on the fight because I started to think, well, maybe he had a seizure. So now I really think he did have a seizure. And then he cut off his own ear. But it was an accident because he had a seizure while he was shaving with a straight blade. But he did go give his ear to that prostitute that he didn't pay and said, here, this is a gift for you, from me, and let Paul know that he'd paid. With his own flesh and blood. Because that's what he said to him. I don't have any money. What do you want me to do? Give her flesh and blood? And so that's what he did. They were drunk. And Vincent was epileptic. And he didn't realize it. Then the townspeople petitioned to have him thrown out of town. And they arrested him and put him in this horrible asylum place for a little while. And then his brother Theo made arrangements for him to go to Saint Remy, to a hospital there, where he did well because they actually treated him for epilepsy. And he painted a lot there, and Vincent thought, till just recently, that the townspeople had petitioned him out of town and as a crazy person because he'd been spotted out in the wheat fields letting them blow him around, and he was smiling, and some woman gasped and ran. Maybe that started the petition, but I think it was more the ear incident and the argument with Paul Gauguin and whatever he said to everyone in the midst of the argument. Obviously, he made people think that Vincent was dangerous when Vincent really wasn't dangerous. Maybe to himself, but not to anyone else. So he wasn't allowed to go back to the little town where he cut off his ear and they had the yellow house because of the petition. And then he spent a long time in the asylum. So when he was let out, he was really sort of confused as to what he was supposed to do from there. And so he found a little town right outside Paris that he could easily get to Paris to visit his brother and take paintings to the gallery there. But he didn't end up living that long in this new town. He found a little room at an inn. But Theo had, when Vincent was in Arles, where the yellow house was, Theo had already expressed that he was having trouble paying Vincent's bills. And that's what they worked out from when they were quite young. That Vincent would send Theo paintings and Theo would send Vincent money. And so that's how they did things for a long while. And so there, in Arles, there were boats. There were these boats, and I still love those boats. There was trouble with money, and I would, to save Theo some money here or there, I would stay in my friend's boats. My friend was the boatman, and he would let me stay in his boats. I had one in particular I really liked, and I think it inspired Starry Night, because I still remember laying there and absorbing the stars with their reflections and that whole movement thing, and it comes from the reflection of the stars in the water, which is not something anybody else would really know, but something I know in my soul. And there was a boatman in Arles, and they questioned him about Vincent after Vincent's death, but he didn't die in Arles. He was kicked out of Arles. They petitioned him out, and then he went to this other little town right outside of Paris, and he rented a room at the inn, though he felt bad about the money there as well, because Theo had already expressed problems with money. So he wasn't staying at the inn every night. And this is something the innkeeper didn't disclose. They didn't allow him to stay at the inn every night. If he didn't have money, they booted him. So there were times where Theo hadn't sent money because he didn't have it. And Vincent would sleep in the barn or find a boat. He kept his art things in the barn, so sometimes he would sleep there. Honestly, I think that's how he may have gotten shot. He didn't shoot himself. I think he was sleeping. He may have had a seizure. Seizures, after you have a seizure, you feel like you've been run over by a truck. So I think it was the middle of the day, so it was unheard of for Vincent to be sleeping in the middle of the day. He had an amazing work ethic and probably felt horribly guilty for sleeping in the middle of the day, but after a seizure, he'd have been exhausted like anyone else. And they even talked about how some of the kids used to go into the barn and shoot the rats. And, if Vincent was all covered up with blankets or canvas or something, the kids might not have seen him in there sleeping and wouldn't have thought anybody would be in there during the day sleeping. But I think that's where he was and what he was doing. And he wasn't painting at all. And that's why they never found his painting stuff. But it was probably in the barn, where there was probably some blood as well, because that's where he was shot. And he was shot in the belly, because he was laying and they shot him. And it was some kids from the neighborhood. And he'd already befriended one of the boys and was talking to him about art. And the other brother was kind of a loose cannon. So Vincent covered for the boys. He had a brother. He had a great bond with his brother. He had a lot of siblings, but he had a specific bond with Theo, his younger brother. And he did have a history of covering for people who beat him up or hurt him. He covered for Paul. He covered for the boys. He covered for people who beat him up and said he beat himself up. He never beat himself up. He never shot himself. He probably did cut off his own ear, but it was an accident. So then, after he shot himself and was bleeding and everything, they let him stay in the room in the inn. And he said, I need somewhere to be because I have to have a doctor come and look at this. So he had his psychiatrist come look at it, who was a military doctor. He thought maybe could do something, but the bullet was like lodged in his butt, kind of. And that's where, like, the doctor just didn't think he could get in there and get that. So he didn't. And I died there in the inn. And I guess Theo squared away the money. He came and was there when I died. I don't think I've ever run into the reincarnation of Theo. I think they stopped making Theos after Theo. He was a special brand of person. And he died shortly after Vincent. So, not of syphilis either. He had a kidney liver problem. Probably liver. Oh, so every week here at Fireside Tales, I also sing David Crosby's Deja Vu for you. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I think it's a song about reincarnation. I'm not sure about the specific phenomenon, deja vu. Like, when you're in a place that you've never been before, but you've been there before, that kind of deja vu, I think, is past life related. But those little snippets of time where you've seen everything happen in just the exact sequence that you just saw it happen in, you've seen it happen that way before, I think that's from our dreams. Though I have some past life instances in my dreams as well, so I guess it sort of all crosses over a little here or there. Nonetheless, Deja Vu. Did it, did it, did it, did it, do did it, did it, did it, do 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 been here before, I would probably know just what to do. Don't you? If I had ever been here before and another time around the wheel, I would probably know just how to deal with all of you. What's going on? Under the ground. Do you know? Don't you wonder? What's going on down under you? La da da, la da da, la da da da, la da da da. We have all been here before. We have all been here before. Well, that's it for me today. Thanks for watching. Have a weird and wonderful weekend. A Mililli Studios production.